Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Dennis. I serve as Executive Director for the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's resident talk. Sitka is located at Cascade Head on the north central Oregon coast and resides on the unceded traditional lands of the indigenous people now represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. There is so much to learn as just one step that we can take, especially when we are planning to visit Sitka or the coast. We just really encourage you to visit the Grand Ronde Chichalu Museum and Cultural Center. I believe, and now it's my pleasure to introduce the first of tonight's residents. McKinley Wiley is a self-taught editorial portrait photographer based in his hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. Since he picked up a camera nearly 20 years ago, his intention has always been to empower people to see the beauty within themselves, even if it's only for a brief moment. In 2019, he was the recipient of the Cleveland Arts Prize Verge Fellowship. His work has been shown in galleries such as the Notre Dame College, Bostwick Design Partnership, the New Glick Building on Metro Health's main campus, and the Cleveland History Center of the Western Reserve Historical Society. McKinley, we are so glad we were able to host you at Sitka this winter. Please welcome McKinley Wiley to Sitka.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for the introduction. Just finished my residency at Sitka, and it was simply amazing to say the least. You heard Allison describe what I do. I mainly do photography, mainly photographing people. I've been doing that for almost 20 years now. It'll be actually 20 years in this summer. I want to start out by just saying the reason why I even came to Sitka was over time of doing a lot of commercial shoots, events. I work with a lot of corporations here in Cleveland, Ohio, which is my hometown. Been here my whole life. Doing that over time, it just kind of, with doing commercial photography, it just the business of things kind of can get stressful. In some ways, even felt performative. And that wasn't really the reason why I got to photography in the first place. I wanted to do stuff along the lines of what's behind me. This is actually I'm sitting in my dining room right now, and my wife and I, we have our art some of the art we've collected over the years right behind me. This is actually her mother. I started off photography to do that type of thing, to be in galleries and to do exhibitions and that type of thing. But when I started out, I realized photography isn't free, it costs a lot of money. So I ended up just going a commercial route. But in that time, I met so many wonderful and amazing people, and here I am. I started applying for residencies a couple years ago. I found Sitka on the internet. It's been amazing to say the least. That is actually me standing there with the maroons. So this is actually the Salmon River, which is walking distance from the Sitka campus. It's probably a mile, give or take. This was literally the first day I was driven to campus and the sun was setting. I had to capture this. This image really describes what my experience at Sitka did for me personally. It was empowering, very impactful. You can tell by my stance, and the weather was actually warmer than what it may look, and it just felt good. This was the same afternoon near Sitka campus. This was my first time in the Pacific Northwest ever, so I was just enamored by all the forestry and everything that I'd be spending roughly a month in. I was just floored by just being in nature. Really did something to my spirit. And then maybe a week or so into my residency, I decided to go up the Cascade Head Trail. That's the Pacific Ocean that we're looking at. Just the sound of the waves. I can hear this picture. That just had so many therapeutic and healing, impactful things to me the whole time I was there. It's really hard to put into words. I feel like I'm rambling now. Also, I climbed uphill to get this photo, and that Cascade Head Trail it's pretty steep. Gravity is real. Like it's oh gosh, I would say distance wise, it was maybe 4 or 5 miles, maybe. And it was all uphill. So if and when you visit, like you be ready for that if you decide to take that on. And it was on this particular day, it was raining. So by the time I got to this point, I was almost so pretty intense. And it was pretty late in the afternoon, and I was worried about it getting dark. So all of that was a real cathartic experience. I'm by myself, and it's my first time in the woods. Like, so just climbing this trail alone was just intense. And I was just taking it all in. But to get up and to see this amazing view of the Pacific Ocean was amazing. Just looking at it now, I could really just hear the waves. And I mean, the image doesn't even really do it any justice. This is ideally what I feel describes Sitka campus. You're surrounded by these wonderful, majestic spruce trees. This was at taking that sunset. This is an idea of what the trails look like right here, and all the lichen on the trees. It was just so beautiful to me. This gives you an idea of the type of photography I do anyway. I make my living. I'm always looking for cool things to document. This image is the trail to another part of Sitka's campus. They have an 80-acre preserve where residents can stay. That's a former resident. We went up there to visit one of our resident friends while I was there. Thankfully, it was warm this day because this was a very long hike uphill. Otis is I learned this the hard way, is very mountainous. A lot of rolling hills, but it was exciting to say the least. Another former resident, Erin Shigaki, she was staying up there on the preserve, and there's a newt on her arm there. So yeah, we have fun just hanging out in nature there. And this picture actually describes one of the greatest things about Sitka, because it's all self-guided. Like, you can just really spend days doing stuff like this, and no one's gonna hold it against you. This image here is me, obviously. It also depicts one of the main reasons why I came to Sitka was to rest. The onslaught of work that I got post-COVID, or even even in the heart of COVID time, really did a lot to me. It was very, very stressful. So me getting this residency at this time was almost perfect in a way. I needed to rest, but at the same time, I still wanted to be in a space where I could focus on my art. And as you can see, that's hanging up on the wall behind me. This is actually in my loft at Sitka, by the way. This isn't my home, but hanging up behind me here. I mean, I was so grateful for this little pin board at Morley House on Sitka campus, but hanging up behind me here are monoprints that I created from my photos. And I'm going to get into that process and how I created those very, very shortly. Describes also one of the many opportunities of having fun at the Sitka residency. We went exploring on the beaches. I forget which beach this actually was, but it was very close by. And that's Aaron Shigaki, and we were just on the beach looking for cool rock. That's something that I learned people do out there. And it was just fun to do. Again, I was just enamored by the waves. This picture doesn't show how high the waves were, and just being next to water. I already live next to water in Cleveland, but the ocean is different compared to just Lake Erie. It was just really magical. And I feel like this image also of Aaron, again, we were just out there collecting rocks and exploring. Like, I felt like I was on another planet while I was in Oregon. This looks dystopic, even though she's just wearing a raincoat and boots, and then you have all the rocks scattered about her. I'd never seen this stuff before, I'd see stuff like this on TV, so to actually be in it physically really just speaks volumes, and it's just really hard to articulate in words. This is, again, us exploring on the beach. I took this photo, so I'm behind them. These skylines were just to die for. One day we went out, we saw these jellyfish scattered about on the beach. They were really pretty. Had to get a picture of those. Like, when I say scattered, like, it looked like this. You couldn't walk without stepping on them. I forget the actual name of these. We looked it up. And then this is another one of the jellyfish on a piece of driftwood that are washed up on the beach. Here, we went to Nescoin. This was actually at high tide. This just describes how magical the environment is there. I'm just not used to seeing stuff like this in my hometown, so I was just floored. This is one of my favorite pictures. That's Jiyun. I just love the shape of this. You can also go canoeing on the Salmon River. It's a simple walk down the road, and yeah, we went canoeing, and I fell in, actually. That was exciting, but clearly I survived. This is us on the beach. That's me right there. This was at low tide. I literally felt like I was just in a sci-fi movie, just looking at the whole landscape. And we kind of toured the beach here. Like, you could see here on this line here that this is how high the water normally would be. And I wouldn't be able to stand where I was standing to get that shot. This is us walking on the beach, like, just how dystopic, and I don't even know what else to call it. It felt like we were at the end of an apocalypse or something. Like, when I was just standing there, it was just crazy to me. And we walked through this hole here again. You can see the line where the tide had receded. Like, all of this will be submerged in water. So I was just kind of floored to be experiencing this. Then we got to see the cool starfish. And so while I was there, I got to do some professional headshots of one of the residents. This is Erin again. She wanted to be just captured having joy in nature. So I said, okay, I have my camera. This was very informal. This describes how I interact almost all the time with subjects, even while I'm home in Cleveland. It's just like, hey, you want to take a picture? You're here. So the weather was great. Light was beautiful, and we're in the perfect setting. Here with this image, this is one of the monoprints that I've created from one of my photos. So basically, I do these monoprints from jelly plates. So I take, like, basic copies of photos, and I use acrylic paint roll them on a jelly plate, and then I'll hopefully get a good transfer. And then I add colors. Typically Bristol paper works well, but I've been experimenting with other types of papers that I end up using. This is one of my favorite pieces. It says Black Girls Are Artists right here on the t-shirt that the gentleman is wearing. And this was derived from this photo right here that I took probably about 3 years ago now. Here's another monoprint that I created, and it was derived from this photo. We were actually, during this photo, we were trying to recreate the Roberta Flack album cover from chapter 2. If you're a certain age or if you listen to R&B, the good R&B, then you would know about that. This is a good friend of mine from college. So I went from that to this. With me doing these monoprints, it's just, I'm trying to give my photos new life. So there's all types of textures and just a lot of things that I'm seeing in my head when I do these. And being at Sitka was just the ideal situation. It was just perfect for me to be able to create these monoprints. So this actually isn't my photo. I went to my local library's archives to get this cover of the Plain Dealer, the Cleveland, Ohio's main newspaper. This is the cover from March 13th, 1988. And this person here in the middle is actually my wife when she was about 4 years old. This is her mom, who she was really close to. She's deceased. And this was the guy she was dating at the time. So I dug this up. I have this printed and framed in my house now, but I went from that to this with my printmaking and painting. I'm not even sure what to call this process. People do this type of work. There's like, it's all over YouTube. I feel it's different what I'm doing. Here's a portrait of my wife. This was probably like a year and a half ago. I took this of her. And then I got this from a jelly plate print. Here's a close friend of mine, Kyle Kidd. And that was derived from this portrait that we did a while ago. When I do display these, they'll normally just be the final image. Here's another one that I did while at Sitka. This is one of my favorite ones that I created while I was there. It just reminds me of a sunset. This is my good friend, Perrin. We took this well over a decade ago. So I went from this photo to that. I really got to enhance my creative side, to say the least, in doing this. Like, I never thought I would be doing anything like this in my artistic photographic career ever. I've been wanting to get into the fine art world, and being at Sitka allowed me to really be more confident in my journey in doing that. So thank you for everyone that's been so patient with me and on the Sitka staff and everything. It was truly great. I hope I answered some questions about my process and who I am.
Thank you so much, McKinley. You said it was cool to hear your bio read out loud. It's so cool to see Sitka and the landscape here through your lens. It just really was special to see your images. So thank you for sharing them.
Thank you. Yes.
Maria T. Allocco is a multiracial Korean and Italian womanist writer and the first individual accepted into both Columbia University's nonfiction and poetry master's programs. She's an Academy of American Poets Prize recipient and two-time Voices of Our Nation and Tin House alum. Maria is at work on a collection that reads as both nonfiction and poetry. For as she said in the New Yorker, she writes, quote, mixed genre pieces on mixed race experience through lenses of feminism. Please join me in making some joyful noise and welcome Maria Allocco to the Sitka Center.
Thank you so much, Allison. I have only been at Sitka for a week, and it has been such a full, beautiful week. So I wanted to express my deep gratitude to Sitka, also to the staff. I'm going to take this time to do a short reading. I'm going to read aloud one piece to you, published in a Los Angeles Review. This takes place after the arrival of COVID-19, which obviously was a significant moment in our collective history. I guess this said, I kind of want to recognize that we've all been through a lot and that we all have a lot that we're working with right now. You know, and being at Sitka, you know, it's a reminder that nature is, of course, interconnected, and that we, of course, as beings of nature, are interconnected. So some trigger warnings for this piece: COVID-19, death, suicidal ideation, and patriarchy. May all beings be happy. This is addressed and dedicated to my sister with love, and it's titled, You Work with Death. I once asked you what it was like to watch people die. We were on our way to drink flights of wine. You described a man's head filling with fluid until it was the size of a watermelon. We slowed on the sidewalk as you spread apart your hands, to a size unimaginable for a head. We stopped in our high heels. I didn't know that could happen, you said. He'd flatlined. We continued, as you spoke about a man in your trauma unit trying to kill himself. The second time he showed up like a ghost. The fifth and sixth visits like a friend. The last time he stood in front of a truck, you said. You glimpsed my disbelief. On the highway, you clarified, as if I doubted his desire. I think that's all I can take, I said. Okay, you picked up the pace. This place has really good flatbread. In med school, you took Mom to see the corpses. Maybe it was family day at the hospital. Do you want to join? Mom asked, smiling over her shoulder, as if you too were going shopping at the mall. When we ever did go, we rarely chose our own clothes. You in those Minnie Mouse clogs, who would choose those? What's it gonna be like? I asked you. You told me the truth. Bodies on tables? Dead? I asked. Yes, you replied. You stood for hours over those bodies, like our mother over the cutting board, chopping at an even beat, a ritual sacrifice every time. She could have been the doctor. Instead, she chose it for us. Turning away from you, the eldest, I didn't want to see the pressure you were under. I'm okay, I told her. When I was 14, my honors biology teacher shoved his fingers up the aorta of a cow's heart, squirting its juices onto the white lab coat he wore as if he were a doctor. Wrenching it away in his gloved hand, he held the heart dripping onto the floor. Can you have some reverence? I asked. He announced my F for the experiment, ordered me to sit outside. On the floor? I asked. No chair out there. He said he didn't care. I set the curve so he gave away no A, sent my wise ass weekly to sit in the corner. Again and again these men would send my heart to the slaughter. Like you, I was our mother's daughter. As a little girl in South Korea, our mother aced every exam. Her teacher, a beast of a man, hit her with a stick. At Johns Hopkins, so you'd be salutatorian, some guy rigged your final experiment. In Dallas, in your white coat and stethoscope, men asked to speak to the real doctor. In New York, male doctors underneath you yelled orders. A man-made machine, keeping one alive, once broke. You ordered the man's chest cracked back open to slip your gloved fingers in, held his blocked heart in your hand, pumped him back alive for 20 minutes, open palm, then fist, open palm, then fist, open palm, then fist. In a restaurant in San Francisco, I saw your hands glow. Oh my God, I said, your hands. You hid the halos under the table. Your hands are God, I said. I can see the light around them. There was no doubt. I know what I saw. You channel God when you do surgery, I realized. Not everyone can see that, you replied, so quick to exchange compliments. Your white male colleagues booked you with their worst cases before they left on long vacations. You have no idea, you once told me, of how it was to be mixed race Korean and the only woman surgeon. No one else could have done it, nurses told you. You once told me, in a whisper, you held the best record in the hospital. Patients returned with souvenirs for you. We last saw you at Christmas. You bake our cookies every year like a mother, sugar cookies like grandma's, flattened under pressure. Sometimes we sing together as we clothe their fragile bodies with pastel-colored frostings, jewel cookies, your tradition, with their exposed red jelly insides. Now it's fall. I flew away from New York and ended up back in California. You said you felt relief. You worked on call the entire week, reusing the same mask. We sent you 3 N95s. Now patients are filling the hospital. Your scrubbed and gloved hands, when free, sewed elaborate embroidery for every member of our family. You made me an angel once. I cross-stitched you one in return of Snoopy at a typewriter. Chocolate chip cookies are red. Chocolate chip cookies are blue. Chocolate chip cookies are sweet. So are you. You display it over your desk in every office. On the phone today, you said stitching skin is different. Something else heals it. You do your best, you said. God does the rest. Growing up, I remember you hiding in the closet. Once I opened it, curled up next to you, made my body into a soft shell too. What are you afraid of? I whispered. Death, you said. Please don't tell Mom and Dad. I pinky promised you. Now and always, your life is precious. How was it? I asked Mom upon your return from the cadavers. She went straight to her room. It was too much for you too. We both trained in opera. You wanted to be a singer, filling our house with a vibrato so thick and melancholic, your voice sounded as if it sang to the rain. When you were 14, you removed every shiny black seed from your share of the watermelon with a metal chopstick, shared the fruits of your labor with me. I accepted 2 cleaned cubes, then refused. You did all the work. I noticed you saved the sweetest ones for the end and felt guilty eating them. So I averted my gaze. I could feel you savor them. Now I want to turn and see your face. Thank you.
Thank you for reading to us, Maria. Our next presenter is Katrina Bello. Katrina is a visual artist whose work in drawing and video is informed by reflections, observations, and experiences of natural environments encountered during the course of immigrating from the Philippines to the United States. She has participated in solo and group exhibitions in the United States and Philippines and has been awarded fellowships and residencies in the US. She has participated in exhibitions at the Montclair Art Museum, the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey, and Gallery of Faro in New Jersey, at Museo Cultural in New Mexico, and Mo Space and West Gallery in Metro Manila, the Philippines. She has been awarded residencies at the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation, Malay Arts, the Tides Institute, and Museum of Art, among others. Katrina founded North Willow, an informal artist-run exhibition space that is dedicated for site-specific installation projects in Montclair, New Jersey. Katrina received a BFA from the Mason Gross School of Arts at Rutgers University and an MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. Please join me in giving a warm Sitka community welcome to Katrina Bello.
Thank you for that introduction, Allison. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, McKinley and Maria, for the just very moving presentation of your works, and also this amazing gift of time and space, and to meet my really just wonderful cohort. I wish I could meet everybody, like we all have simultaneous residencies, but that's not how it works. So it's an honor to be with you all, and this gift of time to just think, explore, and examine in this amazing surroundings, and looking forward to what we'll all make in the future after this extraordinary experience. I really want to thank the Sitka Center for that. So hello, everyone. I'm Katrina, visual artist. My work is about the natural world, and it's heavily informed by my experience of being an immigrant here in the United States. I came to Sitka to work on some ongoing and new projects, but now after being here for a little over than a week, things change, and I want to be here now more with to have a more free and open mind, so that just like McKinley, when you describe this place, I just want to feel the place more, its uniqueness, the serenity that the landscape brings. Just to listen to the sea at different times of the day. I wake up very early and it sounds different at 3 in the morning, from to 3 to 5 in the morning. It just changes. I want to smell the sea more and touch everything, touch the rocks, touch the tree bark, touch the wet grass, touch the sand. And recently touching all those amazing rocks that we found by the coast, especially those rocks that have those fossils, and to just be immersed in this, just the sensory qualities of the place. And I guess especially to observe nature at its own very, very slow pace. Being in Sitka also for me is quite special for its location. It's located eastern border of the Pacific Ocean. And why it's special to me is because when I stand on the coast of Oregon, I know that far on the opposite side of that ocean, that's around 19,000 kilometers away, across that ocean is the shore of the coastal city where I was born and where I grew up. It's also the place where there's this black sand beach that me and my brothers treated as our playground from the time we were babies until we were teenagers. And it's the color of this water that this hand is holding here in this video. It's also across that very ocean where it's where most of my family members are. It's also across that ocean where my older daughter still lives. So a lot of things not only mean a lot to me across that ocean, but for many immigrants like me, their families, their children are separated from their families, their dreams, their longings. So I wanted to choose this series of videos to start my talk because I feel that for me, it just perfectly embodies like all what my work is about. It's about my experience of migration, but it's also about my interest in the natural world and my interest in landscapes and seascapes, particularly bodies of water, the health of our oceans, access to clean water, territorial disputes, political issues regarding oceans. I mentioned pollution already, pollution and ocean acidification. I feel that just much more actually than my drawings, like my videos really like communicate what I want to say with my work. So since I mentioned drawings, in addition to my video work, I make very large drawings, such as this. This one is also based on a body of water. This one is based on Atlantic Ocean. And another photo just to get the size is 5 by 8 feet. At the same time, making these large works, these large drawings, I make the opposite, 5 by 8 inches, like this one and this one. And it's the scale basically of the interior of your hand. So they're that small. And here is another drawing that's also another large one, also 5 by 8 feet. This one is based on a scorched tree bark of a redwood tree. The title of the drawing is right there. It's called Lupain. It means land in the Philippines. It was fun. I wish I had a picture of the tree bark, my tree bark, the scorched redwood tree bark reference for this drawing, because when I look closely at the patterns of this tiny piece of tree bark, it really looked like a scorched landscape. And it made sense to me to make this drawing out of it, to call it Lupain, because Lupain, within the words of that Filipino word is the word pain, this land that underwent this English word inside my native language that shares, there's this kinship. of this damaged earth. And so it's hard for me to describe why this. Also, I make very large and very small drawings for where the genesis, like why do I make these extremes in size and scale, and works that focus on nature and environment and the state of the natural world. And a lot of it, I think, it's just kind of snapped on me. It's this image. This is from 2010, the BP oil spill. I think it's still, to this day, the biggest oil disaster where 5 million tons of oil, I think, were spilled in the Gulf of Mexico. And it was so big that this image was just splashed all over the internet. It's so big that you can see it from space. And so seeing this image, I think it's what triggered me. Like, it takes scale, like the scale of a disaster. So there's something about scale that I find that if you want to move somebody into action, or you want to move somebody's emotion, there's something about it, whether it's in any form of artwork, there's something about scale that can propel somebody to feel more, to think more, or to be moved into another thought when scale and address. And so maybe that's why I think that I feel that for me, like making large drawings so that I can communicate better what I feel, what I observe about the subject of the work, making it large, but also making it small, like making small works to feel that it seems to be something that to be protected, that it's fragile and it's cared for. Perhaps that's what will kind of make clues to my large and small drawings. And so now, back to Sitka, back to my experience here. And then these rocks, these stones, this McKinley, this made is such an otherworldly landscape coast, right? I felt the same way. Maria and I went there and we went completely nuts, just collecting stones and fossils, finding ones that the best shows these amazing bivalves, and I still don't know what to do with them. And interestingly, I have another picture over here. I brought a stone with fossils from Lake Michigan on the left, and one of the stones that I found on the coast, and they just perfectly fit together. And I know they're 4,000 kilometers or miles away from each other. And the dating is very different. I think the one from Lake Michigan is about, I forgot what period. I'm just my paleontology, geology, dating. I think it's about 400 million years old. And the one from the coast of Oregon, the fossils there, it says between 15 to 30 million years. And these two found each other. So at the same time, when I was finding these things, I'm thinking, what do I do with these things? There's this amazing book I found at the library, In Search of Ancient Oregon by Ellen Morris Bishop. It spoke the line that I had there in the image, this word called terrains. It spoke of these rocks or a section that were moved around because of plate tectonics, and calling them immigrant landscapes. Oh, I have a connection to that idea. So it made me, this is where I am right now. Like, where can I bring this idea of these rocks that move through time? And to meet another rock, its kin. So for me, there's something just very moving about that, this connection of these inanimate objects that have a life of their own. And for me, it's sparking ideas about connection is not something that's limited to the realm of the human, that it's something that is shared by all things on our earth, whether it's animate, it's alive or inanimate. So that's where I am now. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. There's a question in the Q&A just quickly about what medium are you using, or mediums, for your large drawings?
I mix charcoal together with soft pastel. I crush them together. Sometimes it's just soft pastel, but the dark one, the second one that I showed that was darker, that was most charcoal, which made sense because it's scorched tree bark. This charcoal is probably, I don't know how much actual wood material it still had. This one is a mixture of soft pastel and charcoal, mostly charcoal. The drawings, they're graphite, and this one is soft pastel.
Katrina, thank you so much for sharing your work. Our next resident Rose Abramoff, PhD, is a research scientist, activist, and performance artist. Rose studies the effect of climate change and human land use on a variety of ecosystems, including temperate and Mediterranean forests, Arctic tundra, and agricultural fields. Rose is also a climate justice activist committed to dismantling the fossil economy with love, sociocracy, and direct action. Rose has worked on making people viscerally understand ecology through art, as an advisor with the Climate Music Project, and as a dancer with the Luminarium Dance Company. We are so glad that you are with us in this temperate forest, Rose. Sitka community, please welcome Rose Abramoff to the Sitka Center.
Thank you. I too can't say enough good things about the Sitka Center and my experience in this residency. So just wanted to drop another coin in the bucket in case anyone isn't sold on it yet. Okay, title slide. I'm a scientist, so I can't not have a title slide. I'm a research ecologist is probably the identity that I most strongly identify with most of the time. And so this is a picture of me in 2015 in Utqiagvik, Alaska, which is the northernmost city in the United States, where I got to help out on this warming experiment where we basically insert these heating cables into these plastic tubes you see that are partially installed into the ground and measure how much more carbon dioxide and methane, greenhouse gases, are coming out of this melting permafrost. I'm not going to show any graphs or present any data, but it's enough to have propelled me into much greater forms of action. Most of the things that I study deeply frighten me. And so I've tried to find other ways to engage with them than just making graphs. So here's some of the other ways that I engaged. When I was with Luminarium Dance Company, that was also some years ago. They're a Boston-based company, check them out. We used to give free dance classes to local youth. And one of the ones I did was a dance plus science course where we would teach like the rock cycle and the water cycle and try and help students understand ecological concepts through movement. And I feel like I've done other versions of this, working with composers to make musical pieces that are made out of climate data, or visual artists, sort of like dance art fusion, where I'm usually the person who's helping an artist make a thing based on some data that I have or can help interpret. And that's all been well and good. I feel like I've engaged in a lot of the types of activities that are about like education, writing policy reports, and meeting with policymakers. And I feel like these all fit into the category of things that are like sanctioned and legal, for example. But I have struggled, at the end of my early career, I guess I'm coming to the end of my early career, feeling like these sorts of activities are making an impact, but they're not making an impact as quickly. Nothing so far has made an impact as quickly as we need to make an impact. And so that's the struggle. This is the one graph I promised, which is just to illustrate the number of international meetings that we've had to try and create, as a human society, a treaty to regulate and mitigate climate change. And the colors show the increasing temperature. Red is warmer, blue is cooler. And the y-axis shows the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere continuing to rise despite meeting year after year after year. Now we meet every year, and we're still seeing unprecedented increases in greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And so I started thinking about other ways to engage. This was a couple of years ago. And I was inspired by the former director of NASA, James Hansen. On the left is him in the 80s, late 80s, testifying in front of Congress that climate change was a thing that was actually happening, which I hope now most of us are on board with. And in 2011, the picture on the right is him being arrested after chaining himself to the gate of the White House, protesting the Keystone XL pipeline, which is a pipeline that was actually never built due to the power of collective action. So that's a really good example of a collective social movement really working to stop a pipeline from happening. And so I think about his words a lot when I think about the role of science. If we understand the situation, we must try to make it clear. I did not want my grandchildren to look back in the future and say, Opa understood what was happening, but he didn't make it clear. And so I started thinking of ways to help make it clearer than those, punishingly long reports that nobody was reading, that I've, contributed to before. And so I did the same thing as James Hansen. This was in April of 2022, where hundreds of scientists in 25 countries, including me, took direct action on the same day, trying to raise awareness about the climate crisis. There's me. You can't see the chain around my waist. I'm attached to the White House fence with 4 other women, and we were, arrested. It generated a certain amount of press. And I've engaged in 7 arrestable direct actions and many more, which did not result in arrest. Arrest is not necessarily what we're trying to do here, but it's something that happens when you do a thing like chaining yourself to a drill. This is the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is the largest diameter fracked methane gas pipeline that's currently in the end stages of being built. This drill that I'm sitting on is pointed at the Greenbrier River, which is the longest undammed river in the eastern United States. And it's being built through this type of soil. It's like a karst soil, which means that it's very crumbly. So it's actually quite dangerous for environmental reasons, as well as the obvious climate implications of fossil fuel extraction. We didn't get charged with felonies, by the way. We just got misdemeanors. So this headline is a little bit bombastic. The thing that has probably the most affected my life, interestingly, was not these very arrestable actions for which we've mostly gotten off with legal slaps on the wrist. But this banner that I held up with my colleague, Peter Kalmus, at an earth science meeting, it was the largest annual gathering of earth scientists in the world. And we basically had a little plea. We interrupted a plenary and asked people to take action on climate change. And we were kicked out of that conference, and I lost my job. And I wrote an essay about it, which you can theoretically read, but it may require a subscription. This was a really interesting experience because actually the conference that kicked us out convened an ethics board after we were kicked out, and we met with them and we sort of like explained ourselves and negotiated and had some impassioned talks. And they actually invited us back the next year. They returned our abstracts to the program. And so the next year we brought back a lot of programming to this conference. So now we're sort of expanding a program of educational activities at conferences. The Ecological Society of America, we will have some really interesting programming, basically helping scientists in particular as a community group learn how to use their privilege and credibility to bring the issue of climate change to the fore, and also to learn the basic, principles behind organizing, because I think it's useful for everyone to know how to do that. And so here, apart from one of the main things that I'm doing is what a lot of us are doing, and McKinley's photo aptly showed, which is rest, which has been really regenerative. Another thing that I'm doing here is thinking about the concept of a movement ecosystem. And so, there are a lot of different types of activities that go into social movements for change. For example, climate interacts with feminism, interacts with abolition, interacts with housing justice. Those are connected. Different types of players. So like in here, you can see, people who are working with legislators and playing the inside game interact with people who are doing disruptive mass protests from the outside, interact with alternatives like energy co-ops and mutual aid groups. And so there are many different ways to conceptualize this ecosystem. And so I've been thinking about ways to conceptualize a long-term strategy for how this ecosystem can actually win all of our demands, which is a major undertaking and one that I'm also having a lot of interesting conversations about. And the third thing that I'm doing is trying to think about the role that art plays, the crucial role that art plays in social movement ecologies. So this is one of my favorite quotes, which is maybe a little controversial, but it's Toni Cade Barbara, activist, writer, artist, said that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I find that a very tantalizing charge. And so I've been thinking about ways, not only within this movement ecosystem, like the ways that we communicate with each other and relate to each other and support each other to make the revolution irresistible, but also the ways that you would think of, like how do we make visual representation that communicates the future that we want. So, and that can be something really obvious like banners and signs. A lot of the actions that we do are performance art, like they are essentially theater. So how do we make impactful theatrical pieces? A lot of us are amateurs. Actually, this guy on the left here is Jan Berger from the Paper Hand Puppet Intervention. So he's a professional and that puppet is a professional puppet bird head. But all of these other photos are sort of like amateur, we're just doing our best here. A lot of us are not necessarily trained in any particular artistic media. And so, what are the ways that we, like as a community, can come together to make these messages really impactful? And yeah, that's basically it. These are all of the groups I'm associated with. And if you have any ideas and want to collaborate, please let me know. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rose, for sharing your practice with us. Last but not least, two-time winner of the High Plains Book Award, Maxim Loskutoff is the author of the novel Ruthie Fear and the story collection Come West and See. His stories and essays have appeared in numerous periodicals, including the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Plowshares, and GQ. Other honors include the Nelson Elgren Award and the Montana Innovation Award. A Yaddo and McDowell Fellow, he lives in the Rocky Mountains of Western Montana, where he was raised. His next novel, Old King, will be published in 2024. Max is a returning Sitka resident, and it is always our honor to be a part of his writing process. Please join me in welcoming Maxim Loskutoff home to Sitka.
Thank you so much, Allison, for that beautiful introduction. And as Maria said, these have been difficult years, and one thing that's been a particular joy for me during this time is watching Sitka grow and flourish. And yes, it's been a huge blessing in my life. I've had the opportunity to come to Sitka to complete 3 books. And this January, I came to finish work on Old King, which comes out in June. And it was the last chance I had to make any edits or changes. And like all the best plans, it didn't go at all how I expected. 3 days after I arrived, a huge ice storm hit, and we lost power for almost 3 days. And during this time of disconnection, I couldn't do any of the things I had planned to do, but I found that it was the perfect environment to sort of reflect back on a 10-year project. And at the heart of Old King is the tension between all of our relationships to the technological world and all of our relationships to the natural world. And as a citizen of the modern West, that is sort of the central question, I think, of my work as it develops. And the story of Old King begins in the bicentennial summer of 1976, when a man named Ted Kaczynski began sending his first bombs. And so I found myself alone in a cabin in the woods with no electricity, thinking back on perhaps the 20th century's most infamous lone cabin resident. So once again, Sitka came through with its unexpected magic. I'm going to keep this presentation fairly brief. What I want to read 2 quick things. First, I had the opportunity, as we were beginning to send out the first advance copies of the novel, to write a letter to booksellers, sort of explaining how the book came to exist in my own mind. And so I'm going to read a little bit of that, and then I'm going to read a quick section of the book, which I'll give you some context on. But I want to start with this. Old King began to form in my mind when I was a 7th grader in Missoula, Montana in 1996. The 2-decade manhunt for the Unabomber had become a national obsession. I'd watched, riveted, as the news reported the FBI tracking suspects in metropolises from Massachusetts to Hawaii. A palpable fear surrounded the U.S. mail. When Ted Kaczynski was captured in a 1-room cabin outside the tiny town of Lincoln, my home state was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight, and I realized that something in the Montana woods could change how we think about America. For me, on the cusp between childhood and adolescence, this moment was a revelation, the inspiration for everything I've written about the American West. The fact that the Unabomber had been living in the forest not 70 miles from my house, a forest nearly identical to the one I walked in every day, validated everything I'd suspected as a child. There were monsters in the dark, secrets hiding in abandoned cabins, and a mysterious volition to the trees. Ever since, I've tracked the environmental and cultural upheavals that have defined life in the 21st century and found myself drawn back to what feels like a beginning, the bicentennial summer of 1976, when the in some ways still innocent nation celebrated its 200th birthday and Kaczynski began work on his first bombs. This spark turned into Old King, a novel about 3 very different men trying to reinvent themselves in one of America's last wild frontiers. And I chose the three main characters in this book each to represent one facet of this kind of strange dream of living alone in the wood that is deeply rooted in American mythology. One of the men is a heartbroken carpenter who is looking to create a new life for himself in the wild. Another is a forest ranger from the East Coast who is going with the hope of protecting what wild there is left. And the third is Ted Kaczynski, who comes dreaming of doing nothing less than bringing down industrial society. And all three men fail in different ways. And that's sort of the tragedy at the heart of Old King, and I think at the heart of the American experiment, in a sense. And the reason they fail is because they're never able to sort of reconcile their place within the natural order of things. And so the section that I want to read now is from the perspective of the forest ranger I mentioned, a man named Mason. And he comes to Montana with the dream of protecting predator populations. He's deeply aware in these early days of the dwindling numbers of wolves and bears and wild predators that exist across the West. And so he begins this process of illegally rescuing them from traps and setting them free. The section I'm going to read, however, involves a bear, a grizzly bear that he rescued when it was a cub and nursed back to health and then set free. And years later, this bear mauls and kills a hiker. And Mason is forced to track it down and kill it. And so I'm going to read this brief section in which he sort of faces his dream and his relationship to the natural world. The dusk was luminous. The full moon rising in the pink sky cast an iridescent glow, bringing out the glimmer of quartz in the cliff face below Ogden Mountain. Black smoke from a distant sawmill threaded upward like the exhalation of the earth's interior furnace. Vultures still circled the campground to the west, where the woman's body had been. Mason had tracked the bear for the entire day. In his guilt and hunger, the quest had taken on biblical proportions. He limped after Molly, that's his dog, through forests and across shadowed clearings, haunted by his past. The bear had not stopped and rested as he'd thought it would, as if it knew it needed to retreat deep into its territory. The distinctive tracks it left, the left front paw favored, the dragging imprint slightly deeper, led around Ogden Mountain, keeping to the jack pines at the timberline, then descending through a draw on the far side of the ridge. The bear had stopped to drink at the mouth of Dead Man Creek, and Mason had stopped also, sharing his jerky with Molly. Now night was closing in, and both man and dog were famished, exhausted, and cold. But Mason sensed the bear was close. He couldn't let it escape. His mistake had led to a woman's death. Shadows flickered in the periphery of his vision. He picked his way across a field of scree and paused to rest against the charred trunk of a lightning-struck pine. All around him, similar blackened spear trees were driven into the earth. Fingering the bark, he felt something soft and withdrew a tuft of warm brown fur. He tilted his head back and sniffed the air. He could smell the bear, a strong, musky, earthen scent. It had stopped here and rubbed its back. Mason knew he was in danger. The bear was tracking him just as surely as he was tracking it, but he wasn't afraid. He wondered what it would be like to be eaten. If at some point the pain would be replaced by curiosity, revelation. His only concern was for Molly, who watched him with glinting brown eyes, wondering why they weren't going home. Soon, he said, patting her head. I'm almost done. The woman's death had caused him to reevaluate his entire concept of right and wrong. By arresting poachers and running old trappers out of business, he'd cleared the way for rich tourists to build second homes around the old Mike Horse mine. They'd use easements for an 18-hole golf course at Smith Pond. Their contracting crews killed animals by the score with bulldozers, and the cement they poured left no way for the trees to grow back. They parked their fancy cars outside the Lincoln Hotel and walked beside the river at night. Their children fed deer. A sadness filled Mason that he could not shake, for the Montana he'd first come to 10 years before, with its trappers and speculators and violence at the Wilderness Bar every Friday night. When Mason turned, he saw the bear behind him atop the scree field. It had flanked him and circled back, and now stood upright, watching him like a sentinel in the dusk. Smart, Mason thought, but it didn't matter. He had a gun. Slowly, he unslugged the heavy rifle and braced the stock against his shoulder. The safety was ice cold, and it seemed to take a great amount of energy to click it off. In his exhaustion, he wasn't sure he could pull the trigger. The bear's golden fur shimmered in the moonlight. It shifted its weight, sniffing the air. The hump on its back seemed to grow. It was a magnificent, towering creature, and Mason felt the whispered memory of a time when human life was defined as prey. Before houses and cars and high-caliber weapons. Cavemen raising flaming torches against saber-toothed tigers, sharpening sticks, learning to launch arrows. On and on until technology became a god of its own, and all the predators were vanquished, leaving men to turn on themselves with napalm and nuclear bombs. But we're still prey, Mason thought, thinking of his mother, spending her days alone in the big house in Charlestown, the TV blaring, a slave to desire, shackled by commercials for new appliances and hi-fi equipment, afraid of all the things she might not have. He steadied the rifle, beginning to count down from 10, a tactic his uncle had taught him during their first hunting trips in Maine when he was a boy. Each number slowed his breath and focused his mind. He thought of all the pathways that had led to this moment. His disdain for his father, his love of the wild, his divorce. Pray. He mouthed the word, shifting the interior vowel from E to A. He thought of the woman in the tent, how stunned she must have been that in the last half of the 20th century her life could end in such a way. He thought of the black wolf, alone in the bob, unknowingly transmitting its signal back to the receiver in his living room. He wished he could snap his fingers and make the collar fall off its neck. Of course, Hutch had been right. Pray. Mason couldn't remember his last prayer. If he did now, it would be to the bear he was about to kill, this ancient giant at home in the unfeeling web of the universe. Mason's hands trembled. He peered through the scope. Magnified to fill his vision, the bear's eyes looked back into his, two golden pools, expectant, as if waiting for the debt of its life to be repaid. On the final exhale, Mason squeezed the trigger. The recoil of the rifle slammed into his shoulder. Molly cowered by his leg. The shot was so loud that Mason half expected flames to shoot forth from the earth, his damnation complete. The bear twitched and swatted its chest, rending the fur. Its claws came away wet with blood, and it stumbled backward. Mason ejected the shell and slotted a second round forward into the chamber. The bear rose on its hind legs and bellowed a final wounded call across the valley. The sound echoed over the parks of dug fir that lined the ridges, each one successively lighter in the starlight, forming waves along the shoreline of a lost antediluvian lake. Mason fired again. The impact knocked the bear back, twisting, before it collapsed on its side on the broken rock. The night was silent. The moonlight seemed to tremble. Everything it touched was so pale and delicate that tears filled Mason's eyes. He set the rifle down. He patted Molly's head. He took the bronze Forest Service badge off his uniform and left it beside the gun. "Come on, girl," he said. Then he began the long hike back to his truck, looking east, toward what he knew would be the last sunrise they'd see over the Blackfoot Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Max, for reading for us. Congratulations on Old King. Thank you,
Thank you.
Max, Rose, Katrina, Maria, and McKinley. Thank you, Sitka community, for tuning in tonight. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Good night, everybody.